Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this video that I thought was very particularly interesting. And this is going to be another video by that of the channel that I like to review here and there by Mr. Boxing Ego, a person once again that I think brings up some good points here and there, but also a lot of the times can get a little bit biased with his narrative and try to be a little bit disingenuous, but it is what it is. Anyways, so in this video, we're going to be once again talking about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. And of course, after Canelo Alvarez's most recent dominant victory over Jermell Charlo, one of the top fighters of the generation, with Mr. Jermell Charlo, once again, as I've already stated, although Jermell Charlo at one point in time was completely unified and he's clearly a very good fighter, I never even had him on my top 10 pound per pound list, just my personal view of it. Now, recently, with the loss of Josh Taylor and, maybe a couple of other fighters, maybe you could have debated him on there. Some would debate that he's not even on there at all right now, especially after the dominant ass kicking that he just suffered against that at Canelo Alvarez. But hey, you know what it is, what it is. He was going up in weight, and on top of that, there is really no comparison with that of the skill sets whatsoever. But the big question is about Canelo Alvarez, which many people, of course, would ask, how great of a fighter is he truly? Where does he rank all time? And the bigger question of this video, is he the greatest Mexican fighter of all time? Anyways, both Boxing Ego and, I am also going to talk about it. I want to see what he says. Let's head straight into it.
I think Canelo is a really good during his time. And you can only beat the guys during your time. He is a really good fighter. Where I have a problem is he's not the greatest Mexican fighter from a country that has great history in fighting and has great...
Well, let me interrupt today, Atlas, here for a second. When it comes down to it, I'm going to disagree with both of those sentiments because Canelo Alvarez is not just a really good fighter. A really good fighter is someone like that of a Jermell Charlo. That's a really good fighter. A really good fighter is Danny Garcia. A really good fighter is someone like a Keith Thurman. Canelo Alvarez is an exceptional fighter. He's an all-time great fighter. And I think that if you know anything about boxing, and that clearly if your mind is not clouded by some sort of narrative, whether it be a racial narrative or whether it just be some sort of narrative that you have to try and degrade the accomplishments of Canelo Alvarez, that yes, of course he's an exceptional fighter. And when you talk about other all-time great fighters, Canelo Alvarez's name is going to be there. And I know a certain amount of people will say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. How can you say that? Listen, I'm just going to state this. Can we really objectively and logically say that fighters like Sugar Shane Mosley, Miguel Cotto, Juan Manuel Marquez, Oscar De La Hoya, can we say that those guys are truly 100% above Canelo Alvarez in terms of the career and in terms of skills? Because I would not put them there, just in my personal view. Canelo Alvarez at one point in time was the debatable and really the undisputed number one pound per pound fighter at one point in time. None of the other fighters that I just mentioned were the undisputed number one pound per pound fighter. Now, Oscar De La Hoya, I'm pretty sure he ended up getting close. But Oscar De La Hoya, and I've had a certain amount of people, disagree with me on this when it came down to it. They said, oh, well, Oscar, if they were to fight in their prime, Oscar would beat up Canelo when Oscar's, more talented than all star stuff. When we really talk about Mexican fighters, Canelo Alvarez not only is debatably the greatest Mexican fighter, he is debatably the most talented Mexican fighter. And there are certain guys that would, of course, argue Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. and, of course, Salvador Sanchez. At the end of the day, you could have a legitimate debate that Canelo Alvarez is above both of those fighters, period.
Great Mexican champions and world champions that have greater resumes, that fought greater competition. And it's not his fault. He could only fight and beat the guys.
Which Mexican fighters specifically have fought greater competition than that of Canelo Alvarez? Because it's not Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. It's not Salvador Sanchez. It's not Juan Manuel Marquez. It's not any of those guys. They have not fought greater competition than that of Canelo Alvarez. Let's stop the bullshit here, Teddy. And for whatever reason, Teddy Atlas has a little bit of an agenda or a bone to pick with that of Canelo Alvarez. I'm not sure if it's because he really liked Golovkin and he wanted Golovkin to win those fights. I'm not really sure what it is, or maybe he just thinks that Canelo's gotten some decisions that he hasn't deserved. But at the end of the day, you cannot beat guys like, once again, Gennady Golovkin, Araceli Lara, Austin Trout, Danny Jacobs, Billy Joe Saunders, Jamel Charlo, Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Sergey Kovalev, Miguel Cotto, Chavez Jr. You cannot defeat all those guys and have a debatable, not so great resume. Now, if you want to talk about a guy that is, in my view, an all-time great fighter, but he doesn't necessarily have the all-time great resume as much as some other fighters, that would be Terrence Crawford, not Canelo Alvarez.
He was around, but he lost to some of the best guys. These guys beat the best guys. They lost. Everyone loses, but they beat the best guys too. Guys like...
Well, which fighters overall, once again, are you talking about in terms of Mexicans? Because when we talk about Mexican fighters, what Mexican fighters have ever really truly been remembered as the greatest of their era over Black American fighters or other over fighters, or excuse me, over other that of fighters? Because it wasn't Chavez Sr., it wasn't Marquez, it wasn't Oscar De La Hoya. None of those guys were remembered as the greatest fighter of their generation.
Fez and Salvador Sanchez and Ruben Olivares. So I'm just saying.
And, he brings up Julio Cesar Chavez and he says, well, those guys, they beat the best. Chavez didn't win all of his big fights. Chavez ended up losing to De La Hoya. He ended up getting pieced up in that fight. Now, of course, to be fair, he was a little bit older when it came down to it. And Oscar, in my view, was too big for that weight class, But if we also want to talk about it, Chavez Sr. didn't win that fight against Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. So let's stop trying to pretend that Canelo Alvarez has just lost to some of these bigger guys and that none of the other Mexican fighters haven't, because it's just not the truth. And Salvador Sanchez was a great boxer, but I'm sorry, but I can't put a fighter that only had about 3 title defenses and only fought in one weight class as the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. I don't care how skilled he was. And, he's great, certainly, but I cannot put him above Canelo Alvarez. Sorry.
I'm not disrespecting Canelo and saying that he's not a real good fighter. Tremendous. I'm saying he's not what the fanatical fans make him and what some of the pundits and writers make him, because they want to make him that during their time so they can point and say, this great, great fighter was around during my time, because Sugar Ray Robinson wasn't around during their time. Ruben Olivares wasn't around during their time. Henry Armstrong wasn't around during their time.
Yeah, but Teddy, once again, you're already comparing Canelo Alvarez to other fighters. So what you're really saying is that, in your view, that Canelo Alvarez is not the greatest of all time. But that's not really what the conversation is. The conversation is Canelo Alvarez the greatest Mexican fighter of all time? And you could have a legitimate debate. Because, once again, Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales, for example, they're not ahead of Canelo Alvarez. This narrative that all these LDBC and new media people try to push about, oh, he's not Marco Antonio Barrera and he's not Eric Morales and all this other bullshit. Eric Morales and Marco Antonio Barrera, name me one time they were ever definitively the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. Name me one time. And just because at one point in time you maybe were debatably the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter doesn't necessarily mean that you're above another fighter. But when it comes down to it, Eric Morales did lose a couple fights in his career. At the end of the day, he lost a trilogy to both Manny Pacquiao and Marco Antonio Barrera. He ended up losing to a few other fighters. Marco Antonio Barrera ended up losing to Manny Pacquiao dominantly, both times, I believe. He also lost to Junior Jones, a black fighter, I believe, within his weight division. Even ended up getting knocked out, I believe, within 4 rounds in the rematch. Oscar De La Hoya lost to Sugar Shane Mosley, lost to Felix Tito Trinidad, lost to Bernard Hopkins when it came down to it, lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., lost to Manny Pacquiao. So let's stop trying to pretend that, all these guys are over Canelo Alvarez when Canelo's been within 4 weight divisions and he only has 2 losses in his career.
Boxing Hall of Famer, trainer, and analyst Teddy Atlas says that Canelo's a real good fighter, but he's not the best and greatest fighter in Mexico's history. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Now, that was Teddy Atlas on his show, and he was just weighing in on the whole Canelo versus Charlo fight that just took place, and the fight, that's what the show is called, the fight with Teddy Atlas. He does not believe that Canelo Alvarez is the greatest we've seen out of Mexico. And I'm going to tell you off the jump, I agree with that sentiment. He's cool, but at the end of the day, I can't say he's greater than past fighters because I've said it.
Once again, which past fighters specifically? Because if we're really going into great fighters, the only Mexican fighters, in my view, or the only three maybe fighters that may have a debate over Canelo Alvarez is Chavez Sr., Salvador Sanchez, and Juan Manuel Marquez. That's about it. Now, of course, you had that little guy, I believe, that fought at like 115 or whatever the hell his name was, Ricardo Lopez or whatever the fuck his name was. But, I'm not really sure how much competition there was there, but it's just very interesting because, a lot of the times these guys, they don't consider them over other certain fighters. But then when it comes to Canelo, all of a sudden they put a lot of respect on their name because they're trying to detract from Canelo Alvarez.
For so many years on my channel, Canelo moves in a certain... First of all, Canelo can never be the greatest. Let's be clear. Never be the greatest. Because Canelo does Canelo things. Canelo moves in a certain way that...
And once again, that's the main goal of a lot of these channels, is to make sure guys like Usyk, Fury, Inoue, Canelo Alvarez, that they will never be remembered as the greatest fighter of all time. That's what their main objective is.
Past Mexican greats.
Now, in terms of Canelo Alvarez debatably being the greatest of all time, would I rank him as the greatest of all time? At least, depending on what he would do in his career, I would have to see what he accomplishes, but more than likely not. I think that Canelo would probably make my top 20 or top 10 maybe at the end of his career, depending on what he does, because he's already accomplished quite a bit. I've already stated this. Canelo Alvarez is already within my top 30 fighters of all time. He's right there with Joe Calzaghe. He's right there with Bernard Hopkins. He's right there even debatably with Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler. And I know a certain amount of people are not going to like that, but it is what it is. Canelo Alvarez is a very greatly accomplished fighter.
Or just past greats in general, either A, didn't choose to do, B, they refused to do, or C, it just wasn't available to them, or whatever the reason is. So that being said, I can't say that Canelo Alvarez is the greatest because he does not move like many of the Hall of Famers and legendary fighters.
Oh, please. Canelo Alvarez, once again, he fought a lot of the fighters when they were either undefeated or pretty much at the best point in their career. He fought Miguel Cotto when he was a little bit refurbished and when he was that of Freddie Roach. He fought that, of Sergey Kovalev when he was coming off of 2 wins in the light heavyweight division and still was a champion. He defeated Billy Joe Saunders when he was undefeated, a 2-weight division champion, and moved up to the 168-pound weight division. He defeated Caleb Plant at the best point in his career. He defeated Callum Smith at the best point in his career. He defeated Danny Jacobs at the best point in his career and Gennady Golovkin in the rematch. He fought Aristoni Lara coming off of the Austin Trout win. He fought a lot of fighters. He fought Austin Trout coming off of the Miguel Cotto win. So please. And he fought Jamel Charlo when he was the undisputed champion at 154. So all this bullshit about, Canelo Alvarez moves in a certain way. You want to talk about a fighter moving in a certain way? Let's talk about Gervonta Tank Davis. Let's talk about Gervonta Tank Davis and how he ends up moving in a certain way, fighting Mario Barrios, a fight that ain't no one want to see at 140 pounds. He ends up fighting that of Ryan Garcia, a guy that, it was a good little entertainment fight. But Ryan Garcia, all in all, everyone knew that. Anyone who knew boxing knew that Ryan Garcia was not going to beat Gervonta Tank Davis. That's a fighter, or Mikey Garcia. Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia, those are 2 fighters that move around certain fighters, not Canelo Alvarez. And that's not me saying that Canelo has made every great move in his career, but he's fought a lot of great fighters, especially when they were at their peak or when they were at the best point in their career. So all this other bullshit that people like to say about, Canelo moves in a certain way. All that is a bunch of bullshit. The same narratives that they were trying to use against Floyd Mayweather Jr. But the only reason why they're using it with Canelo is because Canelo was not black.
And, grand campeons that we've seen in boxing history. He kind of beats to the sound of his own drum. Pause. And in doing that, he can never be, in my eyes, considered greater than a lot of Mexican champions like Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric.
Oh please. This is why I like to review these videos, because these guys, once again, they always try to spread this bullshit. So Canelo Alvarez isn't greater than Marco Antonio Barrera. Like, get the fuck out of here. Marco Antonio Barrera, a guy that, never, ever even close, was debatably the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Lost to Manny Pacquiao in the trilogy, lost to Eric Morales at one point in time, lost to Junior Jones a couple times in his career. Like, let's just stop.
Morales and Julio Cesar Chavez. For me, the greatest fighter out of Mexico of all time is Salvador Sanchez. It's unfortunate that his untimely...
Salvador Sanchez, a lot of people could debate that he is, the most skilled. I'm not sure if I can really say that he's the greatest, because when you talk about the greatest, I have to see a lot of accomplishments on your record. And I'm sorry, but Salvador Sanchez, I understand that it was an unfortunate end and that he ended up dying very early on. But I can never put a fighter at, with it as the greatest of all time when you just have like 3 to 5 title defenses. It just can't happen.
The death caused him to not, have the full span of a normal career, but that dude had it, Next would probably be like Julio Cesar Chavez. He went like 89-0, beat the Black Mamba, Floyd's uncle, rest in peace, Roger Mayweather. And, Hall of Fame.
Isn't it interesting that these guys love to bring up 89-0 when it's against Canelo Alvarez, but then when it's against Floyd Mayweather Jr., then they'll be a little bit more accurate in how he got to that 89-0. And don't get me wrong, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., he was a great fighter. He was very dominant. But when you take a look at a lot of those fighters on that 89-0 streak, a lot of those dudes were like 1-10, or they were like 1-2. Like, they were either making their pro debuts or they were bums of fighters. That's why a lot of these fighters, they could fight 10 times a year, because they were fighting fighters that weren't really that good. They were fighting guys that were the bums of the month. Now, don't get me wrong, with that, they would still fight great fights, like against Hector Macho Camacho, or, who the hell that one black American fighter was, Meldrick Taylor, or Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. He still fought guys like that, but, come on. Like, let's not try to sit here and pretend that, these guys are so much more far above Canelo. And if we're really going to be honest, one could have a serious debate that Canelo is already over Julio Cesar Chavez. You could debate it.
Resume and stuff like that. Even though I thought he lost to Pernell Whitaker.
Investing is not for everyone, right?
Even though I thought he lost to Pernell Whitaker. But, Pernell Whitaker's that boy. Rest in peace to him as well. Canelo also, for me, he has more losses than his actual record would indicate. He has fights where he didn't lose on paper, but the world of boxing and anybody who watched it, many people felt he lost. Like,
anybody who watched it, or people overall that have an agenda against Canelo Alvarez. Now, once again, I have to state this, because these guys try to do these same narratives only against fighters that they don't like. And they say, well, we can't, call Canelo Alvarez that great because he only has, these fights. Sure, he won them, but it was really with controversy. And if you're going to use those standards, okay, no problem. But you cannot call, just in my view, you cannot call a fight that could have went either way as a super duper controversial fight. So the second Gennady Golovkin fight was not controversial. Canelo Alvarez, in my view, just pulled out that fight. The Sonny Lara fight was a fight that could have went either way. Now, if you're talking about the first, Gennady Golovkin fight, then yes, that was very controversial. But, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez, if you're talking about another pure loss that should have been on his record, it probably would have been the first Gennady Golovkin fight. But other than that, there really isn't anything else that I can call a flat-out robbery.
No, God. Hey, Max, it's Ponch, it's not Kazakh.
The Triple G, the first fight. Some people even had Canelo losing the second fight. Maybe I have to rewatch it to re-examine it. But I had Canelo winning the second fight. But I was live. I went to Canelo Triple G. I was credentialed media. And in that first fight, I thought Triple G won. It was a close fight, but I thought Triple G won. I think Canelo, he kind of fizzled out. He came out He came out boxing and moving and using his legs much, much more than we've seen. And I think that made him tired. Plus, Golovkin's jab and Golovkin's just brute force and power. So I thought he lost that fight. Edislan Dilata, another fight.
Well, once again, if we're going to go by those standards, I don't have a problem with that. But then we need to stop calling Sugar Ray Leonard as one of the top 10 to top 20 greatest fighters of all time. Because one could debate that if you truly wanted to, that a lot of people see the second Tommy Hearns fight as controversial. We all know, of course, he lost the first Roberto Duran fight. And, of course, in the Marvin Hagler fight, a lot of people thought that was controversial. Andre Ward, we can no longer call him the greatest super middleweight of all time. Or, excuse me, we can no longer put him on the same level as, what we did. Because he ended up losing, at least allegedly to a lot of people, to Sergey Kovalev. And then in the rematch, we can just claim low blows if we really want to go there. So, once again, if we're going to go by these standards of, I thought that he had more losses, that's up to you. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez in the second Golovkin fight and in the Araceli Lara fight, they were both close enough to the point to where you can't really claim them as robberies. So, it's just very obnoxious because people always use this, for their favorite fighters. Or they'll say for their favorite fighters that, if you know how to score, it was clearly this way. But then with not their favorite fighters, they'll say, well, I'm not even going to count that because I thought it was a robbery.
That comes to mind. Some people even said Austin Trout. Now, I think
Well, those people are retarded because Austin Trout did not win that fight.
Personally, I think he beat Austin Trout. However, the bullish was the open scoring. I am not a fan of open scoring. And if you're new to boxing, what open scoring is you get privy to the judge's scorecard mid-fight. So if you're up, if you're down, if they have it about even, those things. And I don't think the fighter should be able to be privy to that information and know if they're up or down in a fight. That's garbage. It doesn't even make sense for...
Well, no, it does make sense, but I understand Ego's point. Personally, I don't think that that's that much of a problem. But it is what it is.
The fighter to have that information, and that's exactly what happened in Texas. What a coincidence with Canelo and Austin Trout. So midway through the fight, they told Canelo that he's way up, and the judges all have him up by X amount of rounds, and they told Trout basically he needed a knockout to win, or he was really down. So Trout started going for broke and getting real aggressive and kind of abandoned the game plan, which is not even his style of fight. It's not his style of fight to just throw caution to the wind and walk you down and all this other stuff. So in doing that, he ended up getting dropped, and Canelo kind of took the rest of the fight lightly and took rounds off, and it just wasn't good. It wasn't good. And Canelo...
Right, so we're going to keep making excuses for that. For the judges, which is already basically a confirmed outcome unless you get the knockout. We're going to make excuses that Austin Trout, because he was down, that affected the fight to a point to where Austin Trout, he had to fight in a different way. Well, motherfucker, if he didn't fight in a different way, he was going to lose anyway.
Put it in cruise control. And meanwhile, Trout has to get aggressive and really fight in a style that's not his own, trying to win. And I'm not a big fan of that. So I agree here with Teddy Atlas. Long story short, don't think Canelo is the greatest that we've seen from Mexico. And I don't think by a long...
I think he's right there. I think that when you talk about the greatest in Mexico, you're talking about three fighters. I think you're talking about Canelo. I think you're talking about Chavez Sr. And, of course, Salvador Sanchez. But I don't know if Salvador Sanchez can be within my greatest talk, at least in terms of Mexico, or even the greatest fighter of all time, no matter how skilled he was. Because, I'm sorry, but I need more than just a few title defenses to determine that. It just is what it is.
Shot. He also is fighting a guy...
I mean, that would be like if Patrick Mahomes ended up retiring tomorrow, and I would call him the greatest quarterback of all time. I just can't do that.
2 divisions below him. And this is not the first time where he fought someone significant.
Right, but Jermell Charlo, once again, he's a guy that could fight a natural middleweight. So let's cut the bullshit. And once again, these excuses are never made for Canelo. Isn't that interesting? Canelo, if you're going up to cruiserweight, fight Usyk. Canelo, rematch Dimitri Bivol immediately. You know, it's very interesting which fighters they love to make these excuses for and which ones they don't.
Smaller than him. Like, just hear me out. Canelo was fighting Cotto. He looked fighting Cotto. He looked significantly bigger than Cotto. Significantly bigger than.
He was significantly bigger than Miguel Cotto, but at the end of the day, what did you want Canelo Alvarez to do? To not go for the Ring Magazine title after Miguel Cotto?
Cotto, and he goes the distance with Cotto. You know, versus like you got a guy like Antonio Margarito who was in the same weight class, and he ended up stopping Cotto. You know, albeit there's some.
Right, but come on, Eagle. You really going to bring up that point, bro? you really going to bring up that point that Antonio Margarito ended up stopping Miguel Cotto with them fucking loaded-ass hand wraps? Come on, bro. Stop the fucking cap.
Potential controversy there.
Ain't no damn potential controversy. There's 100% controversy. Antonio Margarito was using loaded-ass hand wraps his whole entire career before he ended up getting caught in that Shea Mosley fight.
What happened, right? Pacquiao stopped Cotto. But you have Canelo, who is like big and supposed to be real strong and was way bigger than Cotto, doesn't stop him. He's way bigger than Charlo, more experienced. And
he's not way bigger than Charlo, but he was bigger than Miguel Cotto. Keep in mind that when Cotto also fought Pacquiao, that Cotto was a little bit weight drained. There was no weight drain when Miguel Cotto fought Canelo Alvarez when it came down to it. And against Margarito, we all know more than likely that he was cheating.
A lot of the people who try to debate, they say, no, Charlo's bigger. You've seen in the fight.
I wouldn't say Charlo was bigger, but they're more similar in size than what you're trying to let on.
That he wasn't bigger. His frame, just because your frame is bigger, you're not competing at the higher weight class. It is not the same. And I try to let people know. So I really.
Right, so let's keep the same standards from now on. So if Canelo goes up to cruiserweight, why does he all of a sudden have to fight Usyk? Why, once again, isn't it interesting how those standards work?
Long story short, I agree with Teddy Atlas. Don't think Canelo is the greatest.
Of course you agree with Teddy because you hate Canelo Alvarez's guts. And your goal is to make sure fighters like Canelo Alvarez that they're not fondly remembered.
He's a good little fighter, though. But
no, he's an all-time great fighter. That's what Canelo Alvarez is.
Let me know what you guys think. I need Canelo to fight the people I need to see him fight. Andrade,
Well, even the people that you allegedly want to see Canelo Alvarez fight, you never seem to give him any credit anyway. So does it really matter?
Benavidez, you know, the winner of that. Definitely David Benavidez if he wins. And, you know, Bivol, rematch. That's the guy that beat you, so you looked at every other.
And it's very interesting, once again, to say that Canelo needs to do this, and this, you know, in order for him to be greater than Chavez. You know, a guy that lost to Pernell Whitaker, Oscar De La Hoya, you know, and a couple other losses as well, to be greater than, Marquez and Barrera and Morales, guys that, you know, were never even debatably the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Like, come on.
You look below you to bring up Jermell Charlo instead of making sure the Bivol fight happened, and he's the guy that actually showed he could beat you. And it's funny.
Well, Bivol is bigger than Canelo Alvarez. All of a sudden, Canelo needs to move up and weight and fight a guy that's probably 2 weight classes bigger than him. You know, because Canelo's not a natural 168-pounder. But Charlo fights Canelo Alvarez, and then, you know, it's a fake fight. Ain't that a bitch?
Canelo's like, I'm unbeatable now. He's unbeatable now, but you're not fighting the guy that just beat you a couple years ago. It don't make sense, right? That's my thoughts. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Introducing.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that because many times people of old, they like to talk about the athletes of old, no matter what sport we get into, and they love to say, oh, you can't even make the comparison. This guy was much better. When in all reality, there's a much more logical, objective argument to be made. And when we talk about Canelo Alvarez, yes, he is debatably the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. He certainly is above Barrera and Morales. You know, I would also put him over Marquez. The only 2 fighters that are in the same breath as Canelo Alvarez is Chavez Sr. and Salvador Sanchez. And if we're really going to go there, Canelo probably is greater than both of those fighters. So it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.